Rebecca's TED Talk is a powerful reminder of why understanding the reality of trafficking and not the myths is so critical. So let's get into what we all need to know. How do we recognize and report it? Human trafficking is defined federally by the Trafficking Victims Protection Act of 2000 as a trafficker taking an action using the means of force, fraud, or coercion for the purpose of exploiting a person for commercial sex, labor, or services. For minors experiencing commercial sexual exploitation, force, fraud, or coercion is not required. Minors cannot consent to sex, and therefore they cannot consent to sell sex. For adults experiencing trafficking, consent is not relevant if means is present. Coerced consent is not consent. And while the how may vary, trafficking is a result of a power imbalance that creates opportunities for someone to exploit and abuse another person. This is true for labor trafficking, sex trafficking, child trafficking, and familial trafficking. According to Safe House Project's National Data Analysis Report on Human Trafficking Trends, traffickers use an average of 2.3 control tactics for victims. They layer psychological manipulation, economic coercion, and threats to trap individuals in exploitation. The data tells us that force is not the primary driver of trafficking. Homelessness and survival needs are the primary vulnerability exploited by traffickers, followed by fear, financial control, familial trafficking, and substance use coercion. Fear tactics may include threatening to call ICE for deportation, threats to call CPS and have their children removed, or threats of violence by organized crime. Coercion can take the form of withholding pay, withholding documentation, exploiting needs, or relational manipulation. The recently released post-COVID data from Safe House Project showed that nearly 3 in 4 minor trafficking cases being referred for residential treatment involved family members exploiting children. While the statistic may be skewed high, other statistics reported as high as 60%, which is much higher than the pre-COVID Polaris data of 35%. It's important we recognize that youth are being trafficked without ever leaving home. As such, we need to understand that trafficking situations can look similar or on the surface like typical family dysfunction. We need to learn the story and not just the signs. Familial trafficking can start as young as age 4, so waiting until middle school or high school for prevention education is too late. This is especially true in cases of generational trafficking, where this type of abuse has been so normalized. There may not be a safe adult in every youth's life, and so we need to be that safe adult. We need to pay attention. Trafficking often goes unseen. In the anti-trafficking community, we keep hearing the phrase, hidden in plain sight. The Safe House Project national data showed survivors that are seeking services from 2023 to 2025, so quite recent, identified that the primary venue for labor trafficking was domestic work. And the second most commonly used sex trafficking venue is private residences. So if 71% of labor trafficking victims are being exploited in a home setting, and 34% of sex trafficking victims are being exploited in a home setting, these are happening in houses, not in public spaces. We must stay alert and aware and protect those vulnerable in our community. For those of us involved in child welfare, we need to address the fact that youth are leaving placements and walking straight into the hands of traffickers. Approximately half of identified minors of trafficking survivors had child welfare involvement. In addition to the vulnerabilities youth involved in child welfare already have, their runaway experiences are resulting in direct exposure to trafficking. 41% of minors who have experienced CSEC reported that their exploitation involved an elopement episode, and 26% were missing from care while they were trafficked. The data tells us that these are critical intervention opportunities. Our system really needs to increase youth engagement, decrease elopement, and implement rapid response protocols when a youth runs away. We need to treat a youth that's missing from care as an indicator of trafficking. When we strengthen our protocols for identifying victims, increasing placement stability for youth, and using trafficking-informed practices, we can reduce exploitation. It's also important that we recognize the intersections of abuse that many survivors experience. The definition of trafficking may separate sex trafficking and labor trafficking, but traffickers don't. Many survivors can experience both types of abuse, either consecutively or simultaneously. One intersection that needs greater awareness is forced criminality. Forced criminality is a form of labor trafficking, also known as criminal exploitation. It's when a trafficker compels victims to commit crimes or engage in illegal activity for the trafficker's benefit. The victim bears the legal risks, and the trafficker profits. Forced criminality is chronically under-recognized, and it's misunderstood. Examples may include theft, drug trafficking, burglary, begging, fraud, cybercrime, or peer recruitment. When victims are forced or coerced to commit crimes, they suffer the consequences, including a criminal record that may follow them for life. Anyone working at points of arrest, prosecution, or incarceration should be screening for trafficking indicators. An arrest could just be an opportunity for intervention. So let's dive further into the indicators of trafficking. First, we know that each individual is unique. Therefore, everyone responds to trauma differently, and the signs of their trafficking situation will look different. But what's helpful when noticing red flags is identifying some themes. One is extreme behaviors. For sex trafficking, extremes could look like highly sexualized behaviors or dressed and acting really conservatively. It could be extremely rigid boundaries or no boundaries at all. An individual could be really combative and aggressive or extremely complacent and compliant. For labor trafficking, you want to look for work extremes. This could be signs of physical exhaustion, working excessive hours, living at their workplace, having wages withheld, or not being allowed to speak for themselves. Some victims are trained not to attract attention, which makes it really hard to notice if we're not paying attention. Another important signal is change. Changes in behavior, changes in appearance, changes in social patterns, changes in attendance at work or school, changes in performance, or monetary changes such as unexplained money, gifts, cell phones, etc. For our caregivers and teachers in the room, you're uniquely positioned to identify child trafficking because you see youth consistently over time. Consider the extremes and the changes. There could be big educational gaps, or it could even be an A+ star student. It could be a youth who's sleeping in class a lot, or really anxious over the idea that you might call their parents. Well, more so than usual. For our healthcare providers, you should be paying close attention to inconsistencies, especially when a patient's concern does not align with their presentation. For example, if the stated complaint doesn't match the physical findings, or if their emotional affect doesn't match the situation, or if a patient had a serious injury or condition and they waited a really long time to seek care, or until it was unavoidable to seek care. And finally, traffickers use fear and isolation as a form of coercion. This increases their control. Isolation could be physical. It could be social, like monitoring their contact or cutting them off from contact to people. It could be emotional through gaslighting or abuse. Or it could be financial, like controlling finances or creating debt. So how do we recognize and report trafficking? First, we need to learn what to look for. At each of your tables, there's a copy of a human trafficking indicators cheat sheet. There's enough for everyone to take one with you, and there should be extras too. Hang it in your office so you have it when you need it. Remember, people experiencing trafficking often don't identify as trafficking victims, and they may not recognize their experience as trafficking until after the fact. 2. Document your observations of potential trafficking. Information such as who, where, when, and what you saw are helpful in the reporting process. 3. Know how to make a report. If there's immediate danger, please call 911. Otherwise, you can report to local law enforcement. This could be, our police department or the sheriff's department. You can call them at the non-emergency number. You can also report to County Human Services Department. If the potential victim is a youth, please make a suspected child abuse report to Family and Children's Services. And if the potential victim is an adult with a disability or an elder, please contact Adult Protective Services. And the National Human Trafficking Hotline can support with both tips in reporting and referrals for survivors. But now you can also use an app. Simply Report is an app that uses AI-powered behavioral assessment matrix from a closed AI system that triages tips and routes them directly to local law enforcement. It helps connect victims to services, all while protecting anonymity. And importantly for our community here, California protective laws means that the information reported through the app is not reported to ICE. I highly recommend you download the app before you leave. If you're interested in learning more, there will be a breakout session at the Monterey Symposium in May on the ethical use of AI in anti-trafficking, and there'll be more information about the app there. If you suspect trafficking, please don't hesitate. Report it. We also have to remember what not to do. First, don't confront the trafficker. That could put you and the victim in danger. Let law enforcement handle that. Don't promise confidentiality if you're a mandated reporter. We want to be honest with the people that we're working with about the steps we're going to take. Don't rescue. Survivors need opportunities to be able to leave exploitation themselves. What we can offer is believing in someone who discloses and providing options for help. And finally, don't dismiss. Traffickers coach victims to deny abuse, and trauma bonding is real. If we don't believe a victim when they first disclose, they may stop sharing. So what do we do? Identify the signs. Learn what to look for. Be alert to those extreme behaviors, to fear and isolation, to inconsistencies, and to change. Report the indicators and the red flags. Trust your instincts and know who to share the information with. Build trust through relationships with at-risk individuals. Relationships rooted in compassion and care truly make the difference. And 4, provide opportunities for empowerment for survivors to exit exploitation. When we understand how trafficking really works, we can help those at risk. One of the most powerful resources to prevent and address human trafficking is a relationship with a compassionate and committed individual. I want to leave you with this. When survivors of trafficking share about their journey and what was most impactful, it wasn't a perfect system and it wasn't a flawless protocol. It was a person. It was someone who believed in them, someone who cared about them, someone who noticed, and somebody that they could trust. You are in rooms every day with vulnerable people that may be hurting in ways that you don't know. You don't need to have all the answers. You just need to be present, curious, caring, and willing to act. So take the cheat sheet, download the app, make the report, and be the person that someone, someday, will say made all the difference.